without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Julie Kuzhapadov. Julie Kuzhapadov is the founder of Seafood and Gender Equality, also known as SAGE, aimed at building a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive seafood sector. She has spent her career working directly with a variety of stakeholders in the seafood industry to address some of the most pressing environmental and social challenges in the global seafood production. Just a reminder to our viewers to send in their questions through the Q&A box in Zoom. Your questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Please welcome Julie Kuzhapadov.
Thank you so much for that fantastic introduction. So hello and welcome to the first Women in North American Aquaculture Summit. So as Miriam introduced me, my name is Julie Kuzhapadov. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm the founder of Seafood and Gender Equality, or SAGE for short. I'm also the host of the podcast, The Conch. I'm beyond honored to be here to kick off this inaugural event and hopefully inspire all of you, women in aquaculture, as you inspire me on a daily basis. So in terms of an agenda for this presentation, I'll share a bit about myself and my journey in aquaculture, and then we'll take a deeper dive into the challenges that women in aquaculture face in the sector and explore some solutions. I'll also share what to expect for the rest of the summit. So let's start with a little background on me and how I came to be here as we set the stage for our day. So my background's in fisheries, and I started working at a fly fishing lodge in Russia in a remote lodge above the Arctic Circle, where fly fisher clients would come and fish recreationally for wild Atlantic salmon. Because these fish were so special and still abundant in the wild, we started a conservation program using the anglers themselves as a means to tag the fish that they were catching so that we could gather data about them. So my foundation in conservation really started there in the remote Russian tundra. So I was there for 13 seasons, and after leaving, I went to work for a conservation nonprofit in Portland, Oregon, where I am now. We were working on commercial Pacific salmon fisheries, but also in Russia, but this time on the eastern side on the Pacific Ocean. And we were working to improve the environmental sustainability and get them into initiatives like the Marine Stewardship Council certification program. So after many years there, I became a little disillusioned with the lack of attention to the people and communities in our work. Because as I mentioned, we were really focused on the environmental sustainability and the environmental challenges, yet many of the problems we were dealing with were caused by humans, and the challenges and the potential solutions all can affect humans in different, sometimes adverse ways. So for example, here's a photo clearly of a lot of dead fish. And this is from a region that I was working in Russia. And so these fish were illegally harvested and left on the bank to rot. But before they were left, after they were harvested, they were cut open. And if they were roe-bearing females, they were stripped of their roe, and the roe was taken and sold on the black market. So roe is much more commercially valuable than the fish itself, and a lot easier to transport out of these remote fishing areas. So this fish could very well represent an entire distinct run of salmon that will no longer reproduce to make more salmon and will no longer feed the 137 other species that depend on wild salmon to survive. So this is why salmon is called a keystone species. It's really just that important for other animals, including humans and ecosystems. So yes, the environmental implications are clear, but what else? So humans are behind this, and we have to ask, what drove them to do this, to potentially erase an entire run of salmon from the map? It could be greed, undoubtedly, but there are also many other potential reasons like poverty, subsistence, forced labor, and others. So around the same time that I was having my own little kind of existential crisis in Russia about, thinking about the communities and the people, several bombshell articles came out in the global news channels like the Guardian newspaper and the Associated Press around forced and child labor in shrimp supply chains, specifically in Thailand. And so again, we have to start thinking about social responsibility, and it's really staring us in the face this time. And so we had to deal with it. So we could no longer just focus on the environmental, but had to account for the people behind our seafood. So people that are abused, exploited, and sometimes even murdered. So it was at that time that I became the seafood director at Fairtrade USA, which had a capture fisheries standard that encapsulated this, what I call holistic approach to impact, as the standard had environmental, social, and economic criteria. And it really looked at the biological and the social systems as a whole and as connected. So it's at this time that I started to think more about aquaculture and wanted to make a seafood program, make the seafood program a true seafood program and create a mechanism to certify aquaculture farms. So we partnered with the Aquaculture Stewardship Council to do this because we definitely didn't want to create yet another standard by any means. So things went really well and we were able to launch the joint standard, and several ASC farms, certified farms, went on to receive the Fair Trade certification. So unfortunately, in the spring of 2020, along with 23 others at Fair Trade, I was let go due to the global pandemic. So again, another existential crisis in my life rears its head. And after much thought, I decided that the time was right to spur the sustainable seafood movement towards thinking about social responsibility as more than just the egregious human rights violations we were addressing in terms of forced and child labor, which, believe me, these are so important, and I don't mean to diminish them at all, but I just wanted to kind of note that there's more to it than just those egregious human rights. And so I decided to tackle gender equality and support the 50% of the people, women, working throughout the global seafood sector who are more or less invisible, because I believe we can't have truly sustainable seafood if half the population involved in bringing it to your table is discounted, ignored, and unrecognized. And I'm so glad I did, because hello, introducing SAGE, Seafood and Gender Equality. And so we will celebrate our second anniversary in October. So this October, literally right around the corner. So to level set, gender equality refers to the equal opportunity to develop and make choices unhindered by gender stereotypes, roles, and prejudices. It means that the different behaviors and needs of people are equally considered and valued. It does not mean that people have to become the same, but that their rights and responsibilities and opportunities do not depend on what sex they were born with. So gender equality and sustainability go hand in hand, and we uplift, amplify, and integrate diverse voices in the global seafood sector to build a more resilient industry. This is a snapshot of SAGE's theory of change, which is really a roadmap about how we, what our strategies are, what our activities are going to do to make those strategies come to life. And so, in short, our vision is to build women's power and influence in this key sector, and this revolves around three strategies: education and awareness raising about the issues of inequality in the sector, building community and capacity, so things like networking groups and opportunities for leadership and mentorship training, and lastly, gender mainstreaming, which is the integration of gender into all policies, projects, tools, activities deployed in the sector. So some activities we are already doing, where it's already ongoing. And one example is the Conch podcast. Please tune in. I hope you have heard about the Conch podcast, but tune in if you haven't. And several more in the works. So stand by. I'll give you a little bit of information later in the presentation about what we're planning. So if you want to explore more about this document or anything about SAGE, you can check our website at seafoodandgenderequality.com. And you can also sign up for our newsletter there to get fresh news whenever it's available. So you might be wondering about the title and theme of this presentation, Shine Bright Like a Diamond. What do North American women in aquaculture and global music superstar Rihanna have in common? So at first glance, it might seem pretty random. And what on earth could we possibly have in common with this megastar, Rihanna? So for those who might not be familiar, Rihanna is a global music superstar, philanthropist, and business mogul with her own fashion and makeup brands. So when I was thinking about this presentation and what I would like to talk about, I kept coming back to one thing. Women are the invisible backbone of the seafood industry, regardless of where they are found. And women are found everywhere in this sector, from harvesting to farming to processing to sales and marketing. So I was on a walk, and my best ideas come to me when I'm walking, honestly. And I was thinking about how I always say, so let's shine a light on the invisible women in seafood, or let's highlight these women. And Rihanna's song, Shine Bright Like a Diamond, just suddenly shot into my head, and my ears were literally ringing with the song, and I was even singing it out loud, but I will spare that for you today. So then I thought, Rihanna is such a great and famous example of a woman thriving in an industry dominated by men in leadership. And so why don't I just use her life and challenges as a framework for this presentation? So here we are. So Rihanna is global. She is worldwide. According to the Billboard music charts, her total album sales stand at 54 million copies worldwide. So like Rihanna, women in aquaculture are worldwide. So according to the Food and Agriculture Organization, or the FAO, according to their figures, of the nearly 60 million people involved in the primary sector of the fisheries and aquaculture industry, only 14% are women. But if you look at secondary roles such as accounting, processing, and marketing, women's participation balances out. So it's estimated that 1 in 2 workers in the sector are women, and this number is estimated to be up to 70% in aquaculture value chains. So even so, not many women are found in decision-making roles, and because most data aggregated on the industry correlates to harvest-specific operations, women's participation in the value chain, which is largely constrained to pre- and post-harvest roles, becomes invisible. And this brings us to one of the biggest challenges facing women in aquaculture, a lack of sex disaggregated data around who participates and where in seafood supply chains. So sex disaggregated data is what it sounds like. It's just disaggregated according to sex. So women's participation in the value chain is invisible because data isn't collected at pre- and post-harvest levels where women are generally concentrated. So accurate, regular sex disaggregated statistics for aquaculture are not collected in most countries. And in fact, from 2009 to 2014, only 27% of the FAO member countries reported sex disaggregated employment data for the fishery sector, and only 33% for the aquaculture sector. So sex disaggregated statistics that could track women in aquaculture are scarce, and therefore women's presence and influence and interests are invisible. So let's drill down to look at some figures about women in North American aquaculture. So Canada has information around how many women are working in the aquaculture industry, and it 30% according to research, and that number is, quote, rapidly climbing. So in the US, I scoured the internet to find numbers of women involved in US aquaculture, and I couldn't find any. Again, lack of sex disaggregated data is a problem. However, I was able to find bits and pieces of state-specific information around women's participation. For instance, according to one article, in Maine, 1/3 of all limited purpose aquaculture licenses were held by women. So the US ranks 16th in the world in aquaculture production. And according to NOAA, commercial marine aquaculture in the United States consists of a vibrant community of producers that contribute to the seafood supply, complement wild fisheries, and support jobs and other economic activity in our coastal communities and working waterfronts. So the fact that we don't know how many women are involved in production as part of this, quote, vibrant community of producers is really mind-boggling to me. So if anyone knows any available statistics, please feel free to share. Honestly, I could have not found the right place on the internet. I honestly couldn't find any. In Mexico, the National Commission on Fisheries and Aquaculture estimates that there are about 22,000 women directly employed in the sector. However, the data from the National Institute of Statistics and Geography indicate that there are around 14,000. So it's a range, and I'm not even sure if this sounds like a small number, so it must be just for the primary sector. So like in the rest of the world, in Mexico, there are a few data that show how women work in fishing, in what conditions, and the economic value of their work. The data do not exist in part due to an informal nature of their work, as the biases and deficient processes in, biases and deficient processes in data collection. For example, not having sex disaggregated data and not considering subsistence fishing, which is carried out mainly by women in the statistics, are 2 reasons that contribute to the lack of visibility of women in the sector. And I should say this 14,000 to 22,000 number is fisheries and aquaculture. So we don't even know, between those 2 sectors. So despite the important contribution that women make in the sector, they are generally excluded from the decision-making processes and are underrepresented at all levels, with only 9.1% of female representation in senior positions in the fishing industry in Mexico. So the collection of sex disaggregated data to understand where and how women participate in aquaculture is important. However, alone it is not sufficient. So additional methods must be deployed to understand women's roles and responsibilities, their access and control over resources, assets, credits, information, training and technology, the power they have and they don't have, their decision-making, and their access to leadership. So for us to shine bright like a diamond, we need to be counted. Such information sheds a light on how many women are employed, the types of work we do, and how this is changing over time. Current aquaculture policy objectives and strategies are gender blind, and that blindness limits women's entrepreneurial opportunities and their protection at work. So by collecting such data, policies regulating work in the sector would no longer be gender blind. Another key barrier to women's empowerment and gender equality in the aquaculture sector is a lack of women's participation in leadership and decision-making, which I mentioned. And this is around management of a resource or allocations of funds, such as for equipment or gear improvements or hiring staff. So women CEOs in the top 100 global seafood companies can be counted on one hand. So researchers show that, yes, research shows that when women are involved in leadership and decision-making at the highest levels, companies do better. Their bottom line is better and they take less risks. So some companies have commitments to the Global Sustainable Development Goals, or the SDGs, and SDG 5, gender equality, is one of them. Both Maui and Greg, aquaculture giants, actually, who are here today, have public commitments to gender equality. So could it possibly be related that both of these companies recently announced that they posted record quarterly earnings in Q2? Something to think about. So later today, 3 leaders in North American aquaculture, Diane Morrison, Managing Director of Maui Canada West, Brianna Warner, CEO of Atlantic Sea Farms, and Jennifer Woodland, CEO of Nuchalnuth Seafood, will lead a panel called Women in Leadership, View from the Top. These women, all at the C-suite level, will share their journeys and stories about leadership and how they got here. The discussion will revolve around bringing women together to collaborate in the development of their leadership skills and create positive change in the future of women's leadership in aquaculture. So as of 2021, Rihanna is the wealthiest female musician with an estimated net worth of $1.7 billion. Aquaculture presents an opportunity for women to thrive in a male-dominated industry, like Rihanna has thrived in the male-dominated music industry. So the aquaculture industry is growing, and in the US, $1.5 billion worth of seafood was produced in 2018. Small-scale aquaculture represents a potential growth sector for women and may also have the potential to shift the gender bias built into the global seafood supply chain, because it requires little equipment, has few startup costs, and is manageable for a single person. So women are leading innovation in the aquaculture sector. Rihanna is an innovator too, as the first Black woman to head a luxury brand for LVMH, and also holds multiple world's records in the Guinness Book of World Records for how many #1 songs she has all over the world. I was really afraid I was going to mess up saying Guinness Book of World Records. It's really hard to say. So new programs are popping up to spur women's innovation in aquaculture, like Hatch, a global venture and accelerator program for the aquaculture industry, which has launched a global innovation studio targeted for women entrepreneurs in the aquaculture and alternative seafood industries. They have seen firsthand that women are a major untapped innovation resource for the industry and want to alleviate another significant barrier for women in aquaculture, which is access to funding and financial support. So women also benefit from innovation as new technologies can eliminate barriers we face. As aspects of salmon farming become more automated and technological, physical strength becomes less of a factor to raising fish, which can be a barrier for some women. So rather than taking away opportunities, automation is providing new ones for women and helping close a gender gap on farms. So 2022 is the International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture. And last week, fishers from Africa, the Pacific, Central and South America, Asia, and Europe got together prior to the big COFI FAO meeting that's happening right now about fisheries. And they identified 5 areas of action for government in dialogue with their country's artisanal fishing communities to offer a sustainable future for these communities by 2030. And I just want to point out the second one here is guaranteeing women's participation and supporting their role in innovation. So while these, small scale fisheries and aquaculture representatives and the governments are calling for governments to recognize these areas of action and do something about it, and innovation is one of them, there is a caution associated with that, and that's around scaling and intensification of industrial aquaculture. So this group asked for the governments to guarantee women's participation and support for our role in innovation. However, they did note that the growth of the blue economy is creating a, quote, blue fear among small-scale fishers, as they are concerned that their livelihoods are threatened by competition and negative impacts from more powerful marine and land-based industries, such as oil and gas exploitation, tourism, and, as I mentioned, industrial aquaculture, specifically the intensification and expansion of intensive fish meal-dependent aquaculture, such as salmon and shrimp farming. So this is a caution around intensification and efficiencies, because innovation builds these things. And when things become more efficient, they become more profitable. And researchers also caution that as the sector becomes more streamlined and efficient, that there is potential for women to be forced out as the sector becomes more lucrative. So cash cows, as we know, often are the domain of men. So I would like to give a content warning for the next slide, as I will briefly discuss gender-based violence in aquaculture. In 2009, Rihanna was attacked by her boyfriend in a horrific act of domestic violence. So gender-based violence, or GBV, is defined by the United Nations as any act of violence that results in or is likely to result in physical, sexual, or psychological harm or suffering to women. So regardless of the role that women occupy in the industry, there are several concerns that may arise within the fishing arena, in addition to gender discrimination, gender inequality, the challenges that we've discussed so far, and human trafficking. The presence of GBV is one of them. So regardless of the role that women occupy in the industry, again, there are several concerns about this. And the social costs of GBV experienced by women in the seafood sector, including fisheries and aquaculture, unfortunately have additional economic challenges and costs attached to their consequences. And these costs are borne by either the women, the individual woman, or the state. And so from an economic perspective, 7 of the most common challenges that women in fisheries and aquaculture are likely to encounter as a result of their exposure to GBV include changes in employment, sexual harassment, restricted finances and access to education, insecurity, physical health risks, and intergenerational losses. So this slide is actually a misnomer a little bit, because it's not that the challenge is a lack of mentorship for women, but it's really a lack of mentorship for women by women. And so women, in my experience, are really crying out for support, specifically in terms of mentorship opportunities. So from an article titled "Kick Out the Glass Ceiling," written by the exceptional advocate and leader in her own right, Katie Maximic, a woman she interviews said, quote, "Women need to help women. If a woman is in a hiring position, she should tip the scales and hire young women that can be mentored to learn the role." So more than half of those surveyed in a survey conducted by Prince Edward Island governmental agencies said mentorship and networking opportunities, as well as money for programs specifically for women, need to be made available. So the governmental agencies concluded with the recommendation to encourage opportunities for networking and mentorship for women in the agriculture, aquaculture, and fisheries industries in the province. So the need for mentorship was a big theme during season 1 of the podcast, The Conch, Sage's podcast. And it was really interesting to hear women I spoke with consistently speak about the need for women in leadership to mentor other more junior women. And I think the difficulty here is that there are so few women at the top, and they have extreme demands on their time. So mentoring another just might not be physically possible, no matter how much they want, or how much they would like to do it. And additionally, one very senior woman in leadership at a leading global seafood company that I talked with, she told me that she would love to mentor, but actually doesn't know how. So I should also mention that we need to engage men in addressing all of these challenges and all of these issues. And many women I have spoken to have gained very valuable knowledge and advice from men in the seafood industry and from leadership. So really don't count them out at all. And again, Sage has plans to address this lack in the future, so please stay tuned for that. So in the meantime, we're grateful that there's a panel today to address the topic of recruitment and mentorship. In this panel, Kathleen Offman-Mathisen, CHRO at Grieg Seafood Norway, Leah Stoker, Senior Consultant at Aquaculture Talent, and Tina Garlinsky-Gonski, Director of Human Resources at Grieg Seafood BC, will lead a discussion around the key to accelerating development and provide what some describe as shortcuts to success in the aquaculture industry. I'm looking forward to those. They'll speak about mentorship and how women who have been mentored describe the experience and the skills they acquired as essential toolkits for their professional lives. And these panelists will answer the questions of finding aquaculture jobs, recruiting interns, and finding career mentors. So Rihanna is what's called a triple threat in the entertainment industry. She's a singer, a dancer, and an actor, and she's also a mother. So therefore, she is a multitasker, and women in aquaculture are also talented multitaskers, especially considering that women are mainly responsible for the, quote, traditionally female tasks, such as childcare, keeping the house, and caring for elders. And many women want to work on farms, but some of them are so remote that their home duties preclude them from going to work on such a farm because they can't leave their children and elderly for an extended period of time. So in the same survey I previously mentioned, conducted by Prince Edward Island governmental agencies, women identified childcare as the biggest barrier they face in their career in aquaculture and fisheries industries. So yes, climate change. We've recently seen some really devastating effects of the global climate crisis. So in Pakistan, 1/3 of the country is underwater and approximately 35 to 50 million people are displaced, which is 1/5 of their population and equal to roughly 90% of the population of Canada, if you can imagine. So in North Carolina, oyster growers have seen sudden mass die-offs this summer, sometimes seeing as much as 90% mortality due to extreme heat, viruses, and shifts and changes in salinity. So various elements of changing climate, such as rising temperatures, sea level rise, diseases, and harmful algal blooms, changes in rainfall patterns, the uncertainty of external input supplies, changes in sea surface salinity, and severe climatic events will affect aquaculture production and its sustainability. So overall, climate change effects and implications on the sustainability of aquaculture production are expected to be both negative and positive, although the negative effects will outweigh the positive ones, according to researchers. So women are the first and most affected by the effects of climate change globally. According to research, women in communities vulnerable to climate change are often more likely than men to lose their lives during natural disasters due to poor access to coping strategies such as basic life-saving skills or cultural factors that reduce their mobility. So women often play a stronger role than men in the management of ecosystem services and food security, and heat and drought affect food security, water access, sanitation, air quality, and severely compromise maternal and newborn health. So organized human trafficking, especially that of women, is emerging as a potentially serious risk associated with climate-related disasters, as floods and landslides disrupt social safety nets, leaving more women isolated and vulnerable. To meet the greatest challenge facing our planet today, we must engage women and girls and unfetter their resourcefulness, know-how, and leadership. So Rihanna, again, a leader, launched the Clara and Lionel Foundation in honor of her grandparents. And this foundation invests in climate justice initiatives in the Caribbean and the United States and helps communities prepare for and withstand natural disasters. So we can follow her lead and prepare ourselves for the increasing challenges we will face as a planet due to this grave threat of global proportions. So it's important to acknowledge the challenges Rihanna has faced as a woman in an industry dominated by men. However, it is absolutely critical to understand how other social categorizations, such as race, create other challenges. So this is called intersectionality, or the, quote, interconnected nature of social categorizations, such as race, class, and gender, as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. So Rihanna's mother is Afro-Guyanese, while her father is a Barbadian of African, English, Irish, and Scottish descent. So Rihanna has undoubtedly experienced overlapping challenges as a woman and as a woman of color throughout her career. So when we account for the interconnected nature of social categorizations or think intersectionally about the overlapping challenges, the solutions we create will support those who are the most vulnerable. And it's at these intersections where I believe innovation thrives. So later today, there will be a panel featuring an open discussion about different experiences as a woman of color in the aquaculture industry. This discussion, moderated by Imani Black, founder of Minorities in Aquaculture, or MIA for short, with MIA members Natalie Abdo, Taja Sims Harper, and Anushka Concepcion, will highlight the current status of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, in aquaculture, and identify impactful approaches that could advance DEI as we continue to strive for a more sustainable seafood sector. So I'd like to pull up a poll right now. So there are some groups that are working on improving DEI in North American aquaculture workforce. And so the question that they're asking right here in this poll, which would be really helpful if you could fill out, is really, in your opinion, what would you need to be able to make this case to advance DEI in the workforce in North American aquaculture? Do you need a business case for aquaculture DEI? Do you need a list of practical actions that the industry or educators or investors can take to elevate aquaculture, DEI in aquaculture, or a compilation of case studies or examples of successful aquaculture DEI initiatives, networks to connect diverse students to mentorship, support, job funding, etc. So this is really helpful for this group to be able to prepare things that will help you advance DEI in the aquaculture workspace. I think that's hopefully enough time. Maybe we can take that down and see, hopefully everybody's answered. Oh, this is a great, these are great answers. Thank you so much, everyone. So I'll take those back to the group and we'll try to prepare some things that'll be really helpful for you. So let's close that out. That's great. Thank you so much for doing that. We'll have one more poll before our day is over. I mean, before my time is over. So you might be asking yourself, what can I do? So while we are dealing with systemic issues that lead to challenges, as we discussed today for women in aquaculture, there are things that we can do as individuals. So on Sage's podcast, again, The Conch, I've heard many women I've interviewed say that we must stick up for ourselves more. Of course, yes, that's important, but sometimes, it's hard. It's really hard to stick up for yourself. But if you can, ask for the raise, ask for the promotion, ask for what you need to succeed to eliminate some of the barriers that are in your way. If you are in a position of leadership, definitely support other women. And this doesn't have to be a mentorship or mentoring someone if you can't do it. Recommend them, advise them, or do everything you can to support each other. And if you are asked to participate on a panel, if you're asked to participate on a panel, ask to see if there's adequate gender and diversity representation. And if not, don't agree to do it until they make that change. So this is just a few little things that we can do to support women in aquaculture and support ourselves. But really, because we're dealing with these systemic changes, or systemic challenges, we need to ask the industry to step up because this really is a system. So all aquaculture participants have responsibility, and gender equality must be mainstreamed, which I mentioned is the integration into aquaculture planning, development, monitoring, and evaluation, requiring political action by the sector, leaders, advocates, and gender champions, and supported by new technical instruments for implementation. So solutions are literally right before us, and they're everywhere. And so women need to be counted. Every effort around aquaculture should include a gender analysis to count the women involved, understand their roles, and address their specific needs. So before launching a project or a program, ask yourself who is not at the decision-making table, and then find out why. And so this means actively engaging with the women in your company or project. Ask them and they will tell you what the barriers are, and they will offer solutions for you to remove them. And these solutions could be as simple or intricate and complex as we can think of, but some are very simple, which could include providing transportation to farms, childcare, offering mentorship and professional development opportunities, holding meetings during times that are convenient. That's a really easy, simple solution. And the list, again, is really endless. And I encourage everyone to speak to people, and women specifically, and find out what their problems are, the challenges, and how can we solve these things. So today, Jeannie McKnight, Executive Director of the Northwest Aquaculture Alliance, will present on aquaculture advocacy, empowering an industry. So I expect we will hear a lot of similar suggestions around how to empower the industry and each other in this presentation. So I do have to give a small plug for Sage and what we are doing. So soon I'll be launching 2 new exciting programs to support women and build gender equality in the seafood sector. So the first one is a women's networking group called The Bloom. And I'd like to take a quick poll here to ask you, women in seafood, what you would like to see out of such a networking group. So would you like opportunities to network virtually and in person? Would you like to learn from experts, learn from each other about solutions that have worked for them? Would you like mentorship and mentorship training and opportunities to be both a mentor and a mentee? Leadership training or other. And if you would like something other, we can't write it in here, but you could certainly email me. My email's at the end of this presentation, and I'm happy to listen to every suggestion that anyone has around what could they use and what would be helpful for them coming out of a networking group. So take a second to answer that. And again, this will help me craft a program that is really working for you and in service to you. Okay, hopefully everyone's had a chance to do that. Maybe we can end the poll and look at the results. Oh, ooh, this is great. So it looks like everything's neck and neck almost. So it sounds like women have a lot of wants and a lot of needs, and they sound very similar. So thank you so much. This will be really helpful. And like I said, if you put other on there, feel free to reach out to me. My door is always open, and I'm happy to hear any other suggestions. So maybe we could close that. Thanks. So the second program we're launching is called the Gender Equality Dialogues. And this is for leaders in the seafood industry to come together and learn and align on the issues of gender inequality in the sector, craft commitments to address these inequalities, and make sure that we have the tools and information to support change and to implement these commitments. So stay tuned for the launch of these things, and I will, and if you would like more information, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. So I realized that this was a lot in one presentation, and we have a little time set aside for questions. So I want to thank Rihanna for providing the inspiration for this keynote, and thank you to the organizers of this event and for the opportunity to share my story and a bit about SAGE. And I want to thank you, women in aquaculture, for inspiring me each and every day and each other, and meeting head-on the challenges that we face with innovation, grit, humor, and compassion. We are going to win it, no limit. Strong women, we are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julie, for that insightful presentation.
You're welcome.
You had some critical stats in there, and as a Rihanna fan, I really enjoyed this.
Oh, good. I'm happy. Thank you.
Awesome. So we have some questions from the audience for you. So let's go through that since we still have some time left. All right, so here goes our first question. Is there any list of aquaculture businesses run by women, or in general for job seekers?
That's a great question. And the answer, I'm going to say no. I haven't seen such a list. But that's something that I could certainly curate. And in fact, I think there are a lot of women working in aquaculture as owners, women owned companies, but I don't know them. I honestly don't. So that's a great question, and maybe something I'll do.
Right. Yeah, I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, it would be interesting.
Mm-hmm. All right. Our next question is, instead of mentorship, can we work on paid internships that put women in the field? But also, where are these funds coming from to support mentorship/internships? Are there also options for women who want to transfer into these jobs after childcare?
Yeah, that's a great question. So absolutely. I mean, I believe all internships should be paid internships. That is a diversity issue because not everyone can afford to work for free. And by the way, no one should work for free. You should be paid regardless if it's an internship or a job or whatever. Mentorship, of course, is a little bit different because people are giving their time, and that's that's the payment that they make for that. So what was the second part of the question? I'm sorry.
So the second part is, are there also options for women who want to transfer into these jobs after childcare?
Yeah, that's a great question. I honestly don't know. I know a very few. Right now, I mentioned about the Bloom and trying to come up with a program to support women, and that would include mentorship opportunities. And so I've been doing a lot of research trying to figure these out. And there aren't, I can think of, Imani Black's Minorities in Aquaculture that has a great program that creates internships for people. And Imani will talk about that program later, as well as the members of MIA. But there's not that much. And I'm not even sure, how to even answer that question, honestly, because I don't think there's a lot going on. And so that's something, again, that SAGE wants to support. And Imani will definitely have a better answer for that than I do.
Yep, I say stay tuned for our panel with Imani Black. Yeah. Yeah. We have a comment and a question here as well. So hello, Julie, love the keynote presentation.
Thank you.
My supervisor is a woman principal investigator on an aquaculture research grant, which is centered in food justice.
Great.
How might she be considered to be on the Conch podcast?
Oh, yes. I would love to talk to anyone who would love to be featured on the Conch podcast. And so you can find, so my contact information is in this presentation, and I'll just put it in the chat. How does that sound? And so you can reach out to me, and then we can continue the conversation over email. So will everybody be able to see it if I put it in the chat or no?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes, they would.
Okay, hold on. I'm going to put it in there.
Just make sure you're sending it to everyone, and
Gotcha.
Your contact information will be sent in there.
Okay, putting it in. everyone.
Awesome.
There we go. Yeah, feel free to reach out to me because I love having a lot, different people from all over the world and all over playing different roles in seafood supply chains and working on conservation or, sales of seafood, anything. I love it. And I haven't, by the way, I hate to admit, I haven't had much focus on aquaculture. And so that's going to change as we're starting, going into season 3, starting in October. So we've got a lot of work to do to support women in aquaculture as well.
That sounds very exciting.
Yeah.
All right. Our next question is, what would you recommend or suggest to people in leadership to put in place for women in the workplace, whether to support current non-men staff or to encourage new non-men applicants in the future?
That's a really great question. And I think it's a very complex answer because it really depends on what the women specifically in that given context need. And so I would recommend that the leadership asks the women what they need, who are already there. Like, what do they need? Do they need to set times for meetings at different times to accommodate some, housework that women have to do? Usually, traditionally, we do most of the housework, right? There's that. But there's also, in terms of recruitment, that's a really, really great question. And we do have Leah Stoker on here later today, who works for a recruitment firm. And so I would actually ask that question of her. So how can we be more attractive to women as a sector? It's actually a real challenge. And I think a lot of it, I have heard that a lot of it goes back to early education, even in schools. Like, women simply don't know that fisheries or seafood or aquaculture is a viable career choice because they're not hearing that at the high school level. And so high school, even early education. So really, a lot of it could start at the school level, right? Like, telling kids and women, about these jobs, that they exist and they're great. That's one way to kind of make sure that you're going to see more women involved in the future pipeline of aquaculture workers. There's a lot you can do, but I honestly suggest talking to the women what they need, and then also kind of helping to build the pipeline by making sure that women actually know, or women and girls know, that this is a great job and they can go into it eventually.
Yeah, I agree. So, and also staying tuned for our mentorship and recruitment panel taking place after this.